It's interesting to note that in all the years since Marston first wrote Wonder Woman's origin, it's changed very little. There's been lots of writers and artists who've drawn Wonder Woman, but her origin has fundamentally stayed the same, which is Diana was created out of clay and given life by the goddess Aphrodite because her mother was unable to bear children. She grew up on the island full of Amazons, also known as Paradise Island, but never, ever encountered a man.
Paradise Island was a utopia, and it was a utopia achieved without men.
The whole idea of Paradise Island is very much a part of a tradition in literature of the lost civilization.
I think Paradise Island in Marston's conception very much represents his idea of Eden. It's innocent, it's a different place, it's a time out of time.
Until Steve Trevor, an Army pilot, crash landed on Paradise Island.
The serpent, in the form of Steve Trevor, crashes on the island and destroys paradise forever.
Diana steps up, accepts him, protects him.
And then it was time to return him to man's world.
Therefore, it is our duty to see him safely return to the outside world.
I want to be the one to take him back, Mother.
Seconded.
You do not have the experience necessary to lead such an expedition.
Her mother would not allow her to return Steve to man's world because she wanted to protect her daughter. But someone had to take him back, so they decided to hold an Amazon Olympics.
Because she has to prove that she can defend herself against, modern humanity, against modern man.
Unbeknownst to Queen Hippolyta, her daughter Diana entered that Amazon Olympics.
And I think her initiation into this modern world is signified by this contest between the bracelets and the bullets.
She enters into the contest of bullets and bracelets, which she was forbidden by her mother to join, but she does so because she wants to protect Steve Trevor.
Which plays right into the hero's journey, as you have to undergo a series of trials in order to prove yourself before you set out on your journey.
Either you or the world is in crisis, and a cry goes up, and you, among all the other cowards in the world, you accept the call as the hero.
The hero's rite of passage is they get the call and then they go to the place. They have to go to a place and make it better. And that's what she did. She got the call when she met Steve Trevor.
The moment she left Paradise Island in her invisible plane with Steve Trevor on board, she crossed a threshold into man's world, changed her life forever, and it changed ours as well, because we've now had Wonder Woman as a champion for over 60 years.
William Marston started off being a critic of the comic books, but he started to come around because he saw them as a possible vehicle for the transmission of ideas and also the transmission of mythology, which he understood as a psychologist was very important in a culture to change people's thinking.
Comics are more mythology than anything else. They are recasting of mythological archetypes. Once upon a time, I didn't believe that. I do now.
We hear the word mythology, or we think of myth, and we tend to think of marble statue, museum, something classical, something that's very removed from everyday life. But for the people of the time, myths were the stories that they told around the campfire.
Marston plugged straight into classical mythology and then brought that into the world around him.
Myths were created by men to explain the things that they couldn't otherwise explain.
Why is that one so beautiful? Why is that one so talented in some area? And they would attribute that to the gods. There's a lot of wish fulfillment in this.
William Marston was a bit older than most people doing comics, and he knew his stuff. He was a Harvard graduate, and I'm sure he was very much familiar with these Greco-Roman myths because they would have been taught to him in whatever sort of school he had attended as a child.
Our culture was founded by people who were steeped in the Greco-Roman culture. Those myths inform our culture. They're the bedrock of our culture.
All us middle-class people, even if we didn't know much about mythology, we knew that that was a respectable subject that was studied in universities. And here it was in a comic book.
About the time Wonder Woman was created, we had massive changes in society. For instance, we had the women's suffrage movement in the early part of the century. Women had just earned the right to vote. Also, the pressures of the Depression, in many cases, were forcing women to work.
Then World War II really makes a quantum leap, because all of a sudden we now have a new American icon, Rosie the Riveter. We have women going into the factories, picking up and doing the men's work so that the men can go off to fight.
Women's roles in society were changing, and Wonder Woman was tapping into that, was tapping into this new role. Marston wanted to create a mythology that would last, and he wanted to put these ideas that would give people a completely different expectation of the role of women in society and do it in a way that would entertain children.
I think storytelling is a wonderful way to change people's ideas about how the world works. It reflects how the world works, but it also changes people's ideas about how the world works.
And that reaches really what Joseph Campbell used to call the power of myth. It's not a static thing. It's active. When you hear a story, when you listen to a story, when you read a story in a comic book or see it in a movie, something deep in you is activated. You feel your mind jump, your dreams. It's as if you're dreaming awake.
So he was drawing on a much deeper understanding of where these stories were coming from than people, say, like Siegel and Schuster, who were more concerned with the pop culture at the time. William Marston was going back in history to give this character more resonance.
Most societies have their own mythology. They have gods and goddesses that are sitting up high on some mountaintop or some other dimension that are telling their people what to do. The Judeo-Christian religion has their own god. The Greeks and Romans had a whole pantheon of gods.
When we think about gods and goddesses today, we tend to think of them within the context of mythological stories. But in antiquity, gods and goddesses were very real.
The major difference between Wonder Woman and a lot of the other female protagonists in the DC universe is that Wonder Woman is a goddess. Wonder Woman is of herself an archetype. When you say Wonder Woman, everyone understands what you mean.
When people use the word archetype, what they're really meaning is stereotype. It's a very limited view of what one or two words can describe something, and you as a reader or viewer or even a person will know what that person is about, whether that is a hero or a villain, a sidekick, a helpless girlfriend. Those are all archetypes.
Archetypes is a fancy word for a pattern, a constant pattern, a timeless pattern.
Meta patterns, you could say, patterns that exist in all cultures at all times, certain things that are hardwired into the human nervous system, like the idea that there is a savior, that there is a rescuer.
So when Marston wants to describe a story about the emerging new women, in the 20th century in America. He has to go backwards in order to go forwards. And the obvious place to go is the old Greco-Roman mythology. He actually has the common everyday name for his Wonder Woman as Diana. Diana is the Roman counterpart for Artemis. They're essentially the same character. And Artemis is distinguished from all of the other goddesses in that she was as beautiful as Aphrodite, and she was as strong as Hercules, but she's the transgressor, as we say now. She's the outsider.
She's the goddess of the moon and of the hunt. To be a hunter, you have to have strength, you have to have speed, you have to have skill, and sometimes you have to have compassion as well.
So Artemis was the goddess of the hunt, and she had a twin brother named Apollo, who was the god of music. And Artemis was the patron goddess of women and childbirth, and also was a guardian of children.
This female hero archetype is one that ran very strong, particularly with the goddess Athena, who was the patron of this whole city of Athens. And she was a warrior woman. She was kind of daddy's girl, a little different from Wonder Woman, who's more associated with the mother line. But Athena had a lot of the warrior wisdom.
I don't think that the fact that Wonder Woman was a female warrior itself was necessarily controversial, because people were familiar with this through the mythological tradition.
Athena was the goddess of wisdom and truth. Truth, of course, became one of the big tenets of Wonder Woman.
But Marston was also very highly influenced by the goddess Aphrodite, whose power is love. And this was something he wanted to bring into Wonder Woman, that her power was drawn from love.
But she was also the goddess who brought the clay figure to life that became young Diana.
Aphrodite said to the queen of the Amazons, if you want a daughter, make one out of clay, at least in one version of her origin myth. And I can certainly see a lot of Aphrodite in Wonder Woman. She is beautiful.
You have a woman who is as strong as any of the male heroes. She's as fast as anyone else, but she doesn't need men.
So it's not simply about the hot chick, not at all. It's about taking a woman who could be a warrior, whose background and desire to do good and to achieve peace come from a point of view of love and understanding, as opposed to power and throwing a punch. It was a sea change.
Because Marston was so concerned with feminine power, he was drawing on the tradition of the Amazons from Greek mythology.
Well, the Amazons represented to the Greeks something that was way beyond their borders. They had very strict ideas about what was civilized and what was barbarian.
Amazons were boogie women, that they were a cautionary tale about what happens when women transgress their gender roles. That if you go out and you step away from men and you step away from society and you hunt and you feed your daughters horse milk so that their breasts don't grow, or you cut off your breast so that you can fight your bow better, even though all paintings of Amazons show 2 breasts.
The Amazons were said to only get together with men once a year so that they could continue to propagate their race. They would actually bear children, and they only kept the female children.
The Amazons were considered emblems of lust. Why? Because they didn't marry. And any woman who wasn't under the control of a man was clearly out of control with lust.
Because Greek women were supposed to stay in the home.
The Amazons were always defeated by men. So Marston, by taking them to Paradise Island, actually gave them a better ending than what they got in the myths. They weren't defeated by men, they retreated from men.
A lot of people theorize that all myths, all legends, come from some reality.
Archaeological findings in Mongolia in the 1990s found a tribe of mummified female warriors, and they could date them all the way to the 5th century BC, which provides some evidence that there may have been an actual group or band of women that were like the Amazons.
With Marston, it's a combination of the two. He was well-read, he was a psychologist, so he was constantly working in the realm of dreams and archetypes. He was well aware of them, but then he does something that all artists do. They have to make it new. They have to make it relevant for the time. So he swathes this ancient archetype with bold new modern colors.
He created an Amazon and Amazons that were not male baby killing, that were wary of men for good reason, but were not out invading men's territory. An Amazon who was saving the West from the Nazis. An Amazon who really promoted the qualities of ending war, of nonviolence.
So the Amazons, in Marston's view, represented what could be the ideal. Women who were strong and powerful, without guile, who existed on an island, and if introduced into the world of man, could make it a better place. When Wonder Woman came out in 1941, there had been very few other female superheroines that predated her.
Well, when Wonder Woman was so successful, all the different comic companies immediately showed up with their superheroine. There were so many superheroines in the 40s.
I think what separated these characters from Wonder Woman is that Wonder Woman had much deeper roots. She went back further into these archetypes, further into our history, further into our mythologies.
When Wonder Woman was debuted in the pages of All-Star Comics #8, a lot of people think, oh, it's kind of thrown in the back. It's just this little story in the back there. All-Star Comics was huge at that time. That was a great shot for her. And All-Star Comics #8 came out only a few weeks before Sensation Comics #1. So for DC to take the risk to publish the first female-centric comic book ever was huge.
She's not just any superheroine, that's the thing. She's the only superheroine that includes goddesses. In the 60s, what happened was the supergroups. And those, for me, the supergroups are kind of depressing because they're usually like 3 guys and a girl or 4 guys and a girl. There was always the token girl.
She became a member of the Justice Society of America. This was the first team group of superheroes, and Wonder Woman was asked to join. And immediately, they made her the secretary. So a lot of times they would be going out on missions and she would kind of stay behind and write it up and report in. So yeah, it didn't all happen in one single leap over a tall building. It was a process because you have to remember the times in which this was happening. Let's go to the mid-60s. Batman appears on TV and it's campy, but the Batman TV show breaks open a new door for comic book superheroes. And before too long, Wonder Woman comes to TV.
Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman, all the world's waiting for you.
Every woman I knew, and of course they were all feminist, were so excited to see Linda Carter on television as Wonder Woman.
Linda Carter as Wonder Woman is hands down the greatest superhero casting coup of all time.
That hit the cultural American zeitgeist, you know, like a ton of bricks.
I grew up in a small town in Montana, and when I heard that Wonder Woman was coming on television, I was determined that I was going to do anything I could to watch this in the best manner possible. Back in those days, all we had was a black and white television set. So I did extra chores for a week on our farm so that we could borrow a television from one of our neighbors, a color television, so that I could watch the debut of Wonder Woman on color television. It was one of the defining moments of my childhood, and one of the best moments of my childhood.
My sister and I wanted to be her. My sister and I would spin until we wanted to vomit because we wanted to spin into the star-spangled outfit. Looking at Wonder Woman, it wasn't thinking, gosh, I want to grow up and be beautiful like that. It was, I want to grow up and be a hero like that.
The idea of a Wonder Woman is an archetype that has an incredible resonance beyond the comic books, beyond the movies, beyond the TV shows. It's something that appeals not only to women, but to men.
Here's this, you know, woman in this suit kicking ass, and she turns around, and there's a big flare, and she gets into the costume, and she runs really fast. I mean, that was great.
And it's not just men, little boys who found her sexy. It's little girls who found her empowering, and it was gay men who saw themselves in her. So she really kind of touched a lot of different people in a lot of different ways.
At that time, you know, on TV, you know, an average show would get 25 million viewers. And here you had something that was pretty much a hit for a good year and a half before it fell off, and then played ad infinitum in syndication for a long time. So you have, you know, an entire generation of Americans and people around the world, you know, looking at this character.
All of our modern female action heroes owe a very large debt to Wonder Woman. Alias, Buffy, Xena, Ripley, Lara Croft, all of these characters that we take for granted today would not have existed without Wonder Woman.
Ripley could have been a man. You know, you could have written that same exact part and it could have been a guy. But Wonder Woman is a female.
A powerful message, such as Wonder Woman, transfers from one generation to the next simply by evolving.
Wonder Woman came along and tapped into something else. This was not just a standard superheroine. This was a goddess. This was mythology that was being created. And I think the difference between her and her predecessors was that she had much deeper roots.
I mean, how can we not evolve Wonder Woman? How can she not have many more incarnations? That's how archetypes work, I think.
So they've done different things to try to keep things fresh, keep things new. But after every new thing that's tried, it keeps reverting back to the basic Wonder Woman, to the classical mythology elements that worked originally and continue to work today.